welcome to Navigating Betrayal webinar, podcast, and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Kaylee Dunn, betrayal navigation coach, betrayal trauma therapist for over a decade in this free Facebook group, Humans Navigating Betrayal. I'm the admin here. Today, I'd like to introduce to you Joanna and Matthew Raabsmith. We will be discussing Healing Starts Here, raw truths about reconnection after betrayal. I've had a lot of clients. We've had a lot of questions here in the Facebook group as well, asking about this early connection phase, which I'll define a little bit more in a minute. But because we have Matthew and Joanna here, and I'm going to give you their little bio and tell you a little bit about them, I thought this would be great to connect with some people who've gone through it in real life, to share their personal experience, but then also their years of clinical and coaching experience as well. So Matthew and Joanna are clinicians, speakers, and authors. They have authored the book, Building True Intimacy, Creating Connection That Stands the Test of Time. So as you can tell, this is right on the money for their specialization. They have over 20 years of combined experience in counseling, coaching, and guiding couples towards healing and transformation. Their mission is to help couples navigate the complexities of relational challenges, particularly in the aftermath of sexual addiction and betrayal trauma, fostering deep restoration and growth. So Joanna, I know that you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, and Matthew is a professional certified coach. So you're both bringing so much professional training as well as your personal experience today, which is so valuable for all of us here in the group. So thank you so much for joining us. Before we start, please let me know if I missed anything, if there's anything else you want to share about yourself, your life, your family, your hobbies, anything like that. You're welcome to let us get to know you a little bit.
We've been married 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3 amazing kids, 9, 7, and 6.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in the kind of throes of
you are.
energy and chaos. And yeah, I think we're excited just to be able to share. We're really lucky that we get to work with couples and really get to see a lot of transformative, even miraculous experiences taking place in relationships, even if they take a long time. That miracle doesn't always happen day one. So we're excited.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That's really great. My kiddos are 11 and 9. So I'm just kind of you're right where I am too.
It is you.
It's a busy season for sure. So well, awesome. Thank you so much. So I think our audience is most interested in hearing your story. Of course, we're so grateful for your clinical experience. I know you'll bring a trauma sensitive approach in that way. But I know that we're most interested in hearing your story because it can feel like when you're out here just in the abyss of the internet or Facebook groups or wherever, it can sometimes feel like seeing couples who are making it. And of course, we're always one day at a time work, but those who are finding success, who are feeling connected to one another, we don't get as many examples as we'd like because many people get into recovery and then go off into the sunset, And so we're so grateful for you. And we'd love to just hear your story. So you can start wherever you like and just kind of let us know how you got here.
Well, we'll start in the beginning. We met over 15 years ago, actually through a mutual person, my older brother. And so Matthew and him were good friends. And so I would kind of come into town to visit my brother and we'd run into each other and didn't like each other in the beginning, weren't big fans of each other. But as soon as that started turning around, it turned around very quickly. And we ended up, we did kind of like each other. And in fact, we liked each other so much that after 2 months of dating, we got engaged. And 2 months after that, we got married.
Wow. And quick turnaround.
Very quick turnaround. And so we were super passionate about our relationship right from the very beginning, wanted a really strong, a really deep connection, and had no idea how to do that. Ourselves falling on our relational face multiple times early on in marriage. And so part of the story is that we ended up moving across the country to do grad school together in California. And so that's where a lot of kind of most of our story took place.
Yeah. And like Joanna said, we wanted something good. We had no idea how to do it. So we kind of became resource hogs. Like we would just find resources, books, anything we could. And we found there was an 8-week group that we went to at our grad school. And it was about really building strong marriages. And the curriculum and the material and the kind of focus and modality of it that it was kind of based in radically transformed the way we communicated, we worked together. It took what we liked and it made it work so much more consistently. And that was just like, I think it really lit a fire in us for wanting more. And so that's what we kind of tried to do. We tried to make our relationship better and better and better. What was interesting though is even though we had all these great resources, even though we knew some things that worked, we found ourselves starting to kind of hit some dead ends. We felt like that our growth was kind of limited and tapped. Like we knew we liked each other, we knew we had fun, we had good friends, but there was a kind of chasm.
That intimacy, like emotional connection I expected us to experience, it wasn't happening. And I had no idea why. I couldn't figure it out. And it was driving me crazy, almost to the point where I had kind of just given up and like, maybe this is it for us. Like maybe this is as good as it gets. And part of that transformation kind of that we had to that point meant I was going to go back to grad school for a second graduate degree. And that's when I started the MFT program. And it was actually the first class in the MFT program, Shame and Guilt, where a pastor came and shared his testimony, his story coming out of sex addiction. And he told his story. He had been sober for about 3 years. He talked about all the resources he had used in that journey, what that transformation was like for him and for his relationship. And as he was talking, my gut was just telling me, that's the thing. That's it. That's what's going on. That's why you're so stuck. And so I went home that day. I shared with Matthew what I had heard, and I just asked him point blank, are you struggling with this in our marriage?
And for the first time in my entire life, I was 30 something at the time. First time in my entire life, I was honest. I said yes, because up until that point, anybody who knew me did not know that. They knew everything. They knew a lot about me, but they did not know that, and Joanna included. And I had been really kind of fostering and hiding this addiction, this sexual addiction, and these acting out behaviors for years. I thought that our relationship would kind of solve some things for me. I definitely kind of thought, okay, we're happy, things are good, we like each other, we're attracted. There was a lot good in our relationship. But it just over the course of time in our marriage, I just started to see it creep more and more and more in. And at 3 years, when things were really starting to become obvious that we were stuck, that we were really kind of up against this glass ceiling, I was ready. I just knew, I was like, I'm done with this life. I see how much it's really kind of taking from me. But I had no sense of what to do about it. I mean, my thought was, if I tell her it's going to be divorce papers, start your life over, and I lose everything. And so when she told me this story, I think it was the first time that I had this idea that there was a bright future for us, that there was
another path.
Yeah, that there was another path. And so the yes kind of fell out of me. I don't even know that I felt like I said it. It was kind of like, yes, I am. Oh dear God, what did I say? I think
he said,
yeah.
He just said yes.
Yeah.
Like one word, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And so I did, and she handed me the list of resources and she went, good luck, right? Like, this is what I expect you to do, right? I know that you can do this. And then we were off. And recovery was slow, right? It was not something that overnight I felt like things, transformed.
Yeah, we're talking over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So like there's some pretty good resources for him at the time.
Yeah.
There's almost nothing for me. There was absolutely nothing for the couple. And so we kind of stumbled our way through a lot of the pieces of recovery. And thankfully we didn't give up, and we kept hunting until we found the pieces that fit. I remember going to kind of several resources early on that were very codependent, co-addict focused, and just being like, this makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I threw the book in the trash. There was like one book that had a little section in the back, and it was like, and you somehow want this. And I was like, garbage for you. Yeah.
And so I just would like kept searching, and then I would like stumbled upon, Barb Steffens and her book and this
Mhm.
trauma model thing. I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. And so we kind of, we very much piecemealed together on our own recovery. And some pieces went really well. They're really good. We were able to put those in place, and that was really healthy. Other things took us a lot longer than it should have. And wouldn't that have been nice if we had known? Right. But part of that journey, right, of like, no, we want the relationship we wanted from the beginning, and
Yeah.
we're not going to let this deter us. Like, yep, maybe we had to take a side path for a while, but ultimately we
Yeah.
knew we wanted the same thing, and we weren't going to stop fighting until we got there. And we just became, I think, more and more passionate about helping other couples on that journey, right? And kind of like saving them from some of the pain and the heartache we went through. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we figured some of this path out, so you can do the night. Like, we kind of like trailblazed it for you.
Exactly.
So that's a big part of like what our book is about and what the intimacy pyramid is about. It's giving couples a structure and a framework for rebuilding in a healthy way, so you can avoid some of those pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. My story resonates very similarly. My husband and I started right at the beginning of our relationship as well. His disclosure was very early on. So I resonate with just being alone and reaching out and getting just bad information, and him getting into recovery or like starting the steps anyway quite early, because there were resources available quite early, but then going like, but we're not doing great because I'm not doing great.
Exactly.
That was a messy process. And so it sounds like our missions and visions are in a lot of alignment as well. And so we're so grateful to have you here in the group, because it's helping betrayed partners, but then also the couples who are able to work together towards reunification and reconnection have a more efficient experience.
Yes.
Like, gosh, it was not efficient for us. It was like the wild, wild west back then.
Oh, totally.
We were just trying our best.
What the structures we have now, right? It's almost
significantly.
Like disclosure workbooks and trainings. I literally was like, I have no idea what this thing is, but I know we're supposed to do it. So you got 2 weeks, get something ready. And I guess we'll have a therapist to sit with us or something.
Yep, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, I love to hear, both of your growth and your motivation, that you from the beginning. And I think a lot of couples are this way from the very beginning. They get together for a reason, right? They love each other deeply. And if you're okay with me asking, Matthew, I imagine your experience with sex addiction, maybe you didn't call it at the time, probably predated the relationship.
Absolutely.
So probably from when you were younger, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. Things got started pretty early for me, just in terms of like sexualized exposure, even though I didn't, that I can remember, I don't have any experiences of abuse and kind of sexual trauma. I grew up with a sister who is 7 years older than I was. Great sister, love her. But like, this was also about the time MTV was coming out, right? So she's 7 years older than I'm 3 or 4, and we're watching Madonna like a virgin, right? And watching movies in the 80s that had much different perspectives. What was appropriate for children. It's funny being a parent now. I want to show our kids all my old favorite movies, and I'm like, nope. And then I go, what the heck, right? No wonder I came out with a very just kind of warped view of what sexuality was. And I didn't know it at the time, but how much my sexuality was tied to my sense of identity. I often felt insecure around guys, one, because of my size. I was on the smaller side. I often got kind of bullied or picked on physically. And around women and in female relationships, I felt more comfortable. I could talk, I could kind of make jokes and be funny. And so there was this incredible kind of amalgamation of like watching all this sexualized content and romantic content, right, on TV, seeing how I could kind of gain status or gain sense of security in conversations and relationships. And this was all kind of pre-pornography, but this was just kind of making. And then in middle school, when I started to get exposed to pornography, then that just became a kind of further outlet and a kind of further manifestation. And it was at that time that I started to recognize, ooh, this isn't something we're talking about anymore, right? People stopped talking about it. Everything started to go underground. as I started to do things that kind of went further and further from my core value set, the more I did, right? The more I was lying, the more I was really, truly having this double life. And it really was a double life. I was one person in public. I was a pastor for a very long time. I was, probably well thought of. I had lots of friends. I dated and had relationships, but I had this complete double life. And that really just kind of is exactly what I walked into my relationship with Joanna with, was that I kind of put on this front of this is who I am, because that's really what I thought, right? If you'd have asked me, like, what kind of person were you? I would have said I'm this, and then just that other part.
That's just over there, right? That's just over
and
there.
It was so
talk about it.
And it was so
separate.
disassociated from me. Like I thought of myself as like a feminist and somebody who like valued women, and here I am dehumanizing women, right? In the background, I am thinking I'm a loving husband and someone who cares about Joanna, but at the same time, I'm over here absolutely despising her, right? I'm doing things that are going to torture her soul. And so that dissonance, it's something I'd learned to kind of manage and deal with for so long, not realizing that when I got into a relationship that I really cared about, it was going to be this major roadblock for us. I think I just thought, like, it'll go away. It won't keep us from what we want. But over time, that's really what it did.
Yeah. And so it's you described earlier this feeling consistently in your relationship, like there was a wall, like there was a ceiling, like no matter what we do, we can't get past it. And I hear you describing like what it was that I had a part that was dissociated from myself. And so she couldn't see the whole me because I didn't see the whole me and I didn't want to look at myself. And so you can sense that. And that's like the horrible part of betrayal, right? And we'll talk about your experience as well, Joanna, but also kind of the beautiful part of relationships. It's like you have to be all in, or else you can't do them, and it's the hard, but also the beautiful part and reason we get into them is it really makes us, we have to face ourselves, right? And so your choice to face yourself, I mean, like you said, she handed you the papers, but it's not like a magic wand was handed to you that was like bippity bobbity fix, right? Because you have these two parts that now you need to be able to hold both parts of self, be able to look at them both full in the face and try to figure out your identity, like who am I? And there's a whole host of stuff. I'm sure we could make 10 podcasts on it. And I'm sure you have done work on discussing and describing. But so that's a very long process to rewind the tape on that and really find yourself. But you chose to, though, it sounds like, right? So then you kind of walk into, I always say it's kind of like, I don't know if you associate with this, but you're like Lewis and Clark with no map. You're like walking into this wilderness and you're like, or you're going onto the sea, to this ocean, but you're like, I have no idea where I'm going.
Yeah.
And that's the recovery for the betrayer. It's just like, I don't even know where I'm going, but I got to go in this direction. And I hope at some point I don't feel horrible anymore. Because I'm having to look at this part of myself that I didn't want.
Yeah. No, it really does. And I think I remember early on motivated, like I at least had the recognition that it was killing me. And I was lucky that I got into some good recovery resources that were pretty hard line. Like they didn't joke about it. And I was in recovery meetings with people who had gone to jail. Right. They were there. I mean, it wasn't, hey, this is this little side hustle that I'd love to see go away. It was like, this is the cancer that will kill me. Right. And I think that early on, I think helped me stay awake to that. Right.
Good.
And to find the internal motivation to say, like, this has to get out of my life. Like, I was hopeful for us. I think I was like hopeful that, like, okay, if I can resolve this, if I can follow this path, potentially, like, Joanna will say yes to kind of joining me and we have a future together. But no matter what, I think I still had a sense of like, this can't be my life ever again. Like, I just can't live the way I lived going forward. And enough of those healthy fears and stories was like, yep, that's it, right? That's what's going to keep me motivated.
I sensed that switch pretty early on. Like I'd say probably in that moment when I handed that paper to him, right? I think like a lot of those first steps were like, I just have to do this or I'm going to lose her or lose my life or whatever. Yeah. But pretty quickly it switched and I could sense like his motivation was like, this is what he wants for himself. Yeah. This is the person he wants to be. And if I left him right now, I'm pretty confident he would keep doing his own recovery. And that built so much safety early on for me to see that happening.
Yeah. Thank you, Joanna. I was actually gonna ask a little bit for you right at the early stage, which is what we're talking about here. You kind of had this divine, I'd say maybe experience, right? Where kind of the answer is handed to you. Your intuition is like going, there's something here. And then you addressed it with him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was easy, an easy answer for him to say like, yup, that's
Nope. It was not.
so share a little bit about that experience. And I do love that you said like one piece for staying in it for me was that I sensed from him, which is what I do in my work is intuition work on how do I sense if my partner is serious and if I'm safe. And so that you sensed from him that there was internal motivation. And I want to highlight that for our listeners here, that when you sense internal motivation for transformation, right? Because there has to be a transformation. There has to be a reconnection that you described there, Matthew. But when you sensed that from him, you said, oh, well, that kind of was able to float me a little bit to stay in the relationship. So, but tell us a little bit about your betrayal, if you're okay, a little bit of your betrayal experience after the yes, what happened for you?
Yeah, it was this really weird mix of emotions all at once, right? I think there was the relief that he was actually finally being honest, right? And because his yes confirmed what my gut was feeling, so I could keep trusting myself, which was really nice. So it was like, okay, it explained a lot of the past that was so confusing to me, and maybe at times where I'd even like started to doubt myself or like if I was the problem or right. And so it like, kind of provided some relief around some of that. It provided some hope that maybe with honesty now intact or moving towards that direction, maybe we can actually get to that experience of intimacy that I wanted. And so there's like all of that on the good side.
Sure.
then, right, there's this weird dichotomy of like, that is absolutely 1,000% not the answer I wanted to be real and to be true, right? Because there was just the pain of being lied to, of being betrayed, of the pain of the actual actions and choices he had made in our relationship, choosing other things over me and over us. And the pain of not knowing if he was going to step into recovery, if he was going to heal, if there was any hope for our relationship, if there was any hope for the future we had imagined for our relationship, right? We very much had this kind of like deep us vision of like doing life together and doing work together and work around relationships. And it was like, we're not doing any of that now. Are you kidding me?
Right.
And so just all of that just shattered and came crumbling down at the same time.
Yeah. So many unknowns in that one moment of like, whoa, where is this going to go? How is this going to work out? And then while you did sense in him pretty early on, and he had some resources in recovery, right? Like it's probably a 12-step group where you have people being really honest and because that's what there was back then. Just honest, straight line. While he did that, also it wasn't easy right away. And so let's talk a little bit about how the two of you and you can bring up your intimacy triangle that you've kind of developed, I know, over a decade, but how, especially in those early stages, that's what we want to talk about. Especially kind of, he's getting into recovery, he's going to groups, or maybe he has a therapist, maybe he has a coach. He's kind of saying, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. And you can integrate with your clients as well. What kinds of recovery or relationship stuff do you guys recommend? Did you see in your own story? Let's kind of start that discussion.
Yeah. Well, in our story, we managed to find a few resources that were great and really helpful. One of them gave us the information that you got to reset honesty, which we kind of knew already, but we need to do it through this thing called a full disclosure. And so I think I read like the betrayed spouse can't really start healing until after full disclosure. So I was like, great, we're doing this next week then, because I would like to start healing.
Yes. Tell it all in a week.
I was starting my MFT program, I think in 2 weeks. And I said, we will do it before I start. Because I don't want that hanging over my head.
So you were boundaried. We hear your boundaries.
I was very assertive. I had my boundaries. I didn't know what boundaries were, but apparently
you had them.
I did. And so I think he may have even taken off work to do this. Thankfully, he had already been to a men's intensive, so he had done some of his own deeper work. That happened almost immediately after discovery. And so I think the full disclosure early on was huge.
Yeah.
We heard about couples check-ins. That was another thing. And we got a format for that. And we started doing that every day, pretty much right after full disclosure. That was huge. It really taught us how to connect, how to communicate openly, honestly. So we maintain the honesty, the kind of honesty reset that full disclosure provided, right? Well, I was like, well, I don't ever want to do that again. We need to be talking every single day. I need to know if you're or not. I need to know what's going on. And so that was another tool. And then the other huge piece for us that we actually learned prior, and I think this is what really helped our recovery journey go as quickly as it did, was prior to discovery, that kind of 8-week course we mentioned, that we learned a model of therapy. It's called restoration therapy. It's what we do in our practice with clients today. That is what radically transformed our relationship. We learned about our own emotional pain. We learned about our coping behaviors that are attached to that emotional pain that hurt our partner, right? We learned how to self-regulate in the moment with each other. Show up in healthy ways. And so that was enormous for us, I think, in individual recovery, as well as the couples kind of reconnection process.
And practically, I mean, I think really practically, like, it was odd, right? It was hard, right? Like, we connected, but it was still, you could see it was
super
tender,
awkward.
right? Like, please don't anybody out here who hears that thinks, imagine, like, we walked in with all this confidence, right? And like when she said do a full disclosure, I remember I called my therapist and I was like, you know, do you know what a full disclosure is? He's like, yeah, I think you tell her everything you've ever done. I was like, okay, cool, got it, right? And it was like, here we go. And, you know, and so, and even every check-in, I can remember sweating bullets, not because necessarily I felt like I was lying, but it was because this was tender ground. And so the reconnection pieces were small. We did a lot on our own. Joanna had actually just started a program. I was in a new job, doing work. And so there wasn't a lot of living together, but we tried to, when we connected, make it count, I think. And we tried to make sure that the pieces we were doing individually were feeding what we were doing together. And so a lot of what we talked about was like what I was learning. I mean, things I was learning about myself. And that was really a lot of the early conversations was, hey, I did not know this. I'm a sex addict, right? Like, I think you should know that, right? You probably do by now. And
I did long before him.
Right. But now I'm learning what that means. I'm learning where that came from, right? I'm learning my childhood wasn't as good as it was, right? All these things that were for me, those became things we got to talk about, to share about. And like I said, even though we weren't working on our relationship, right? We weren't like talking about relational dynamics. We were, I think, setting the groundwork for kind of this, whatever this new version of us was going to be. And so that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, well, I want to highlight so many important things that you said. And it's funny because my husband and I did the same thing. We're like, well, I heard about a check-in. So we started checking in, right? And I heard about a disclosure and I'm like, chop. So similar, but some things that I heard important. Check-ins are so important. I prescribe those all the time, like so important. But it's not like you're a bad it's not like confession time, right? It's a lot of what you just described, Matthew, of we are both working on ourselves and we're both being really transparent with each other about what we're doing. And in that way, we're connecting, right? Because we have this thing in common, that these wounds that we're working on and learning from. And as we're transparent with each other, it provides the other person a sense of grounding and safety. And in that, there's some more safety and connection, right? So as Matthew, if you're going like, I know I'm a sex addict now, you know, it's maybe not her favorite thing to hear. And she probably already knows it, but she's like, well, at least he knows it, you know? And you might be saying, yes, and I'm really mad, and this is triggering this part from when I was a kid, and da da da. And he's like, well, I don't love hearing that I am, you know, and you might have, but then we regulate our emotions and we take a walk and we come back and we're doing those. But you know, it's so tender. It's like, I was describing it to a group recently. It's like a little baby flower and you're just like trying not to, you know, or little baby skin when you have a wound, you're like, don't touch it. It hurts, you know? And so it's very gentle, but but I heard check-ins, I heard transparency. So keeping each other in the loop where you weren't doing that deep attachment work necessarily, but you were doing your own, you were communicating, you were regulating your nervous systems, you were being rigorously accountable for what's yours. And then you were communicating that, maybe not perfectly. We weren't perfect at it, but we were trying our very best, right? And so you're saying like, okay, this part's mine and I'm going to share it with you. And the other person's like, okay, that sort of helped. I mean, it's kind of like coming out of, and a lot of people describe betrayal as like a car crash and then you're in ICU. And this early phase is kind of like if you've ever had a surgery and you have to like walk around, you're just kind of walking around like, oh, what's happening? What do I do next? Right. But in a way, I think the key component there, right? You had structure. So you had some structure in place. You had a full therapeutic disclosure. I fully agree. We tried to put it off. Like we did a first step inventory and then we're like, that's good enough. And it really just wasn't. And so we waited like 4 years before finally doing like a therapeutic disclosure where we went in and, you know, did the whole thing. And I'm like to everyone, I'm like, just do it now. It might have been 5 years, but I'm like, do it now. As soon as you can do it, you know, because even though we were both all in, we were both doing recovery work. Like once he did the full therapeutic disclosure, I was like, oh, I already knew all of that. It wasn't anything new. Having it in chronological order, having the whole story, it does something for both people's nervous systems to go, we're on the same ground, you know? So absolutely disclosure, check-ins, and then that transparency where we're both doing our own work, but we're keeping each other in the loop. So I wonder if you'd mind sharing what are some of, and I'd be happy to share some of my the foibles, the roadblocks, the moments that weren't so pretty and fun. And you can get as messy or, you know, share as much as you'd like, but I think this is common, right? That it's not always roses and we do get stuck. So what are some of those stuck places 100%. In that early tender moments?
I was not I was not aware that Joanna was going to be upset about what I did. I thought she was going to be so happy that I was honest and in recovery. And so when she wasn't over it in about 3 months, I did not handle it well. And there were some things I probably did right, but a lot of mistakes that I know I made was around really discounting her experience. I think I was, as much as I was learning about my experience, I was not focused on her. And I think there's some kind of need for that because we've seen this go the wrong way where a kind of a spouse who's done the betraying, they think my job is to kind of heal their partner who's betrayed, right? So they put all of their energy, all their focus. I kind of went too far the other way, which was like, I'm going to become an addict expert, right? I'm going to know everything about addiction, betrayal, trauma, whatever. And so when I created safety from my kind of like my boundaries and my kind of structure and my recovery, Joanna would want to share, right? She started sharing triggers with me and I didn't handle them well, right? I would want to get defensive. I would want to kind of name what I was doing now, right? All the things. And I recognize, right, what a kind of slowdown that did for our process because it really forced Joanna to have to go find other places where she could process her pain. And it couldn't be in our relationship for a really long time. And while she did so much good work in healing herself, it limited what we could do as a couple. And so we had friendship, we had camaraderie, like we would do things together, but it was almost like that wall had gotten rebuilt. Like that inability to hold the impact of my actions, because that's what I usually talk about it. Like this was the impact of my actions, and I wasn't willing to hold it. Kept us from, I think, the future we were hoping for, and we meandered a lot in that for a really long time.
And I love that you share that, Matthew, because of how common that experience is. I think it's very common. And I think it makes sense, right? That's your brain's way of functioning before was like, I don't want to see that. We're like, well, now I can see the addiction, but I don't want to see the consequences, right? And then also the piece that there's that wall came back. And then it makes sense that now she's going to potentially, I don't know how it was for you, Joanna, but can be extra triggering because you're like, well, the wall's back. So what does that mean, right? If your intuition is going, and I know a lot of betrayed partners I work with say this, like it feels the same. Like my gut's telling me he's not acting out anymore. My gut's telling me he's being honest and he's doing his work, but
Yeah.
that intimacy piece, and that's the part my heart's plugged into, still
Mhm.
feels like there's a wall there. So I
Mhm.
love the way you described it, because I think it's just very relatable. Now that you're looking back, what could you say got you through to help lower that wall for yourself?
I think it was being able to unify my story. So I think what I wanted was I wanted to have my story separate, right? And I wanted my addiction to still stay in that box. I really, and I can even remember as we were making strides in some recovery, I was like, we're not talking to people about this. Like even when we
Never gonna
started
share this ever
like
again.
fast forwarding, started helping couples, I was like, we're not going to be the pornography sex couple, right? That is not our thing,
It's gonna
right?
be our specialty.
And it was and it was this kind of still wanting to have this disassociated experience of not wanting that part of the story.
Mhm.
And I think as I began to embrace myself, right, as I began to embrace my history as an addict, not in terms of like affirming it, but going,
Sure.
I know that there is a lovable man there in my
Yeah.
history. I know that he is someone who cares about people. I know that he is someone who serves. And I know that he hides, that he lies, that he does things that are outside of his values and character, and people are hurt by those things. And that is all part of my story. I think as I became more comfortable with that, that created an ability to hear things I couldn't hear at all.
Yeah.
And I'm really lucky because Joanna stayed incredibly faithful in that process of, even as if I got a little bit better at kind of creating space for her, she would continue to share. Because I think she could have very easily just shut it down and said, fine, nope, I tried. And so she would continue to kind of journey with me in that. And I would still make mistakes, right? I mean, I'd hit my window of tolerance, right? And I'd be like, oh no, here's defensivism, right? Here he goes.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it was recognizing and kind of accepting that part of my story, that then it wasn't something I was fighting, right? And
Right.
being a husband who betrayed his wife is a part of my story. I'm not proud of it. I'm also not ashamed, nor do I hate myself because of it, right? I recognize it is the truth, but I know I am more than just that experience, and that to me has made all the difference in my ability to
Yeah.
talk about our history, right? To talk about our
Right.
past and to talk about the
Yeah.
things that I did, and it's been interesting because a part of that has helped me to talk about that history of me not handling it very well. I mean, even in our recovery beyond, I didn't, let's not talk about year 2 and 3, right? Let's talk about how great year 1 was. Like, wasn't I
Uh-huh.
really killing
Wasn't
recovery?
I great?
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, and I hear that. So in your work towards like integration of self,
Yeah.
that helps you become a more regulated person, right? And so then you're able to have an expanded window, and then you can hold space for your partner's pain in a better way. So for you, Joanna, what was that journey like, kind of going through that early recovery phase where then you're hitting that wall again, and then you're like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Right?
It's really interesting. I think in early recovery, I was good because I think I kind of knew like he's got to get himself figured out. Like, and that's
Yeah.
all going to take some time. That's going to take some space.
Mhm.
I can work on healing me, right? And so I was actually pretty good at that point because when we started stepping back into the couple space to really start work on our relationship
Yeah.
again, where that really became a big issue. And I remember
Yeah.
kind of again, not great resources for couples at the time.
No.
And so the resources we're diving into were very like more kind of traditional couples resources, right? That approach relationships in a much more balanced viewpoint. And so
Right.
we got to one point of that recovery and I shared something about my experience, right? And Matthew said kind of like, yeah, me too. And I was like, nope,
No.
we're done here.
Yep.
And I just shut it all down.
Mm.
And I think I didn't know what to do at that point, but I
Yeah.
knew I wasn't doing that.
It's very triggering. Like
So
that basic couples work and that early reconnection phase, which by the way, for those listening, early reconnection, of course, kind of can start from the beginning, But you guys are saying like year 2, year 3, year 4,
Mhm.
like we're talking in
Mhm.
years, not in weeks,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Big time.
fully, same with us, same, right? And so it's like we're
Absolutely.
talking like years of finally
Yes.
finding and kind of,
Yes.
and again, hopefully we
Totally.
help others get on that
Mhm.
path a little faster. But
Yes.
absolutely. And so kind of going to those general resources can be so triggering, where it's kind
Yeah.
of like, so what did you do to cause this?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you contribute to this, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it felt so unsafe. And so I kind of like put the wall up, pulled back, and just knew like, okay, he's not at the place where he can see this in a healthy way, where he can kind of hold the reality of what's going on in our relationship.
Yeah.
And until he gets to that place, we can't keep moving forward.
Okay.
And so I wish I knew exactly. I can't. I'm like, my memory's so fuzzy. I'm like, I don't know how long we sat in that before we kind of both, again, didn't have great resources, but we kind of came together and we're like, we don't like this.
Yeah.
We're not okay being stuck here. I don't know what that means or what it looks like, but okay, let's keep moving forward. And so, we did stall out for a bit.
Yeah. And so, but in those moments, what I hear you saying is that for you, safety was paramount. So when you felt, you know, he's safe by way of not acting out,
Right.
but he's still not quite there by way of ready to throw your heart back in the ring full, 100%.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so when you sense that it's okay to pull back and to say, okay, then I'll nurture me. And you mentioned that she went and found other people she could connect with and heal rather than saying, he can't help me, so guess I'll just be miserable. And we're able to create some emotional boundaries for now while we're stalling. There's a time here. And then at some point, I'm guessing, Matthew, you're like, okay, but I don't like it anymore. So now I'm going to have to grow, which I find that often. If people are like, I want to connect with my wife, so I guess I'm going to have to do the hard work, figure out what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because from the outside, it can look like, oh, she was punishing you and she was saying, you're punished. So until you're good, I'm not going to love you. And that's why boundaries are so tricky, because really, it's the only person who knows if it's a healthy boundary is the person setting it, and the person who knows what their intention is, which wasn't to punish him or hurt him or get revenge, to say, hey, I need to push pause. It was just like, hey, this is what I need for safety.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
So I love to hear that piece of it, right? So we can hear all of these tools coming out in your story almost accidentally sometimes, but also intentionally sometimes, right? Like, well, I read a book and we're going to try.
We're doing this.
Exactly. And what's cool about, and I love to interview people who've been in this 10, 20 years, like myself and many others that I interview here, because many of us didn't have the resources, and the resources that we're all sharing now are all very similar. And they're the ones we accidentally fell into, God beamed to us, like somehow we read a random book and we did, and we're all kind of gathering these together to go, look, they all worked, and here we are, right?
These work.
These work, these things.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple more minutes, and then if there's anyone who's listening live, if they have any questions they want to pop below, we'll hit on those. But here's a really tricky question. We could make a whole podcast on this, but so I'll just have you touch on it a tiny bit. Navigating physical touch in those early stages. And when I say early stages, I mean like first 3 years, right? 3 to 5 years. Would you speak a little bit to, in those early stages when we're trying to reconnect, we want to reconnect, how are we navigating physical touch?
I love that. And before we share personally, I think it's, especially in this area, so important to preface it by saying every person and every relationship is so unique in terms of what you need. I have partners all the time that I work with is like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, there's no supposed to. Yes. Not even close. Sometimes what partners need right away is physical touch and connection, because that actually provides a level of security and safety. Other partners are like, don't come within a 5-foot like boundary of me, and I don't know if that's ever going to change, right? And so what I really, really work with is that connection to your body
Yeah.
and learning to be self-aware of your body, because we're talking about physical connection, right? And honoring what your body is telling you, honoring what your body is needing. And part of that is going to be understanding your whole story around that. And so, yeah, so always want to preface it with that. So there's no assumption like our way is the way it should be or anything like that.
And really what Joanna's describing is our way, which is to get to know yourself, because that's going to dictate what needs to stay the same and what changes.
Yeah.
My emotional insecurity and shame that I have been dealing with my whole life has often meant avoidance of physical touch and affection. And so in many ways, I can see where, part of my recovery was to kind of become comfortable with myself so that I become more comfortable with touch, right?
Wow.
And because I was often avoidant of Joanna's touch, right? Even maybe dismissive or sometimes critical of it rather than embracing. When I felt really good about myself in our relationship, I would be naturally more playful and right. And so I needed early on to learn about that, because if I don't, then I don't realize what my touch or lack of touch is communicating, and I don't realize where it's coming from. I work with some guys whose touch is a way of trying to get a sense of connection, right? They're feeling insecure, so they use touch, right? They use physical affection, kisses, or even sex to tell them that they're okay. So they may be on the more demanding side. And so if I don't know that about myself, I might all of a sudden be putting all this pressure on my partner, and they're feeling that pressure, right? They're feeling that experience, and especially really early on in betrayal and trauma, and not recognizing that it's actually coming from a really unhealthy place, right? Even though it's affectionate touch, it's actually coming from a toxic place. It's going to hurt us. And so that's why that kind of knowing and learning to kind of become aware of myself, including touch, right? And not just taking it for granted.
And also thinking about, what does your relationship need for healing in this area based on what it's looked like, right? And so like you're saying, like you need to know your couple dynamic around touch to know what's going to be healthy and healing moving forward. Like Matthew described, he would be very chaotic because it would very much depend on kind of how much he was feeling in his shame that day or week in terms of like how affectionate he would be. And so I was the only one reliably caring for that part of our relationship. And so once this came out, I kind of communicated, I am okay with physical touch and affection. I just won't initiate it. And I only want you to initiate it if you can be reliable, right? And so it needs to be safe, and it needs to demonstrate we're going to do this differently moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So it starts with this foundation. So many times we want to put the cart before the horse and go like, well, I guess we need a lot more sex, or I guess we need less sex, or is it 90 days of no sex, or, and it can feel really confusing and we just go straight to the behavior. But pulling that all the way down to that foundation of like, well, what's the history? What's the story for each of you individually? What's the pattern? And how is that connected to your emotions? How are those behaviors connected to your emotions? And then for the relationship, what does it need moving forward for both of you? And having those conversations, which can be done really great with individual coaches or therapists, and then after that with couples or people who do both. I love how you preface this whole thing, because so many people ask so many questions in betrayal, and almost always the answer goes back to, well, there's not a right answer, but let's go to your gut. Let's go to your story. Let's go to your history. Let's go to what you need today, which might change next week, right? And so being able to communicate that though, and be able to be aware is really key. So I really appreciate your perspectives, your experience, your willingness to be vulnerable with us here today, and to really, dig a little bit into some of the things that you don't always hear people talking about, but I'm grateful that you're willing to do that with us today. But before we finish up here, would you guys be willing to share, if there's anyone that heard you today, really resonated with you, how they could learn more about what you do, get in touch with you if you have any offerings, things like that?
Yes, we mentioned check-ins, how important those are. We've actually created a check-in for couples to use that is good from day one throughout the end of your marriage. This is the check-in we still use in our relationship, and we love it. And so it just helps you learn what that honesty, what that transparency on a daily basis looks like. And so we love to share that with couples. We'll have that for people to grab if they want that structure. And then along with it goes this 30-day kind of challenge to do it every day for 30 days.
Wow.
Because it's really consistency that's going to create that change. It's the little choices every day to do it a little bit differently that leads you really towards that long-term relationship you want.
And they can go to raabsmithteam.com/free and just they'll put in a little email and then they'll get signed up for that challenge. And we've definitely, like I said, we still use it. We'll pull it out on date nights, right?
Yep.
Like just because we like how it creates a connection and a shift in our relationship. We notice that when we do it, we're more understanding and compassionate. We're more excited and playful. And so just being that connected gives so many opportunities for kind of greater relational experience. And so it's really foundationally key.
I love that. I love that. And I will add an amen to check-ins. It was a huge part of building trust. What's one of the big questions people ask? How do I build trust? My wife does not trust me. Nothing I do or say helps. I say, check in and do a good one. Like find, and there's a handful of good ones floating out there. It's not dumping. She's not your religious leader. She's not your therapist, but be transparent and connect. Find those ways to be transparent and connect, and that will build safety if you're doing that every day and being honest. So
exactly.
I encourage all of you to go and download that check-in. Oh, we do have some questions. I'm just learning about betrayal trauma. So this is a betrayed partner. I'm just learning about betrayal trauma. What resources do you suggest to use at the beginning for betrayal trauma?
Yeah, so Raabsmiths is a fantastic organization. We're both trained through them, and so highly recommend finding a professional coach or therapist who is professionally trained in betrayal trauma to help you navigate it. Because for you to try and get all of a sudden get caught up on all the things you need to know to heal from them, right? It'd be like if you were diagnosed with cancer and trying to heal yourself and you bought a bunch of books on cancer, right? Probably not going to go well. So getting some people on your team who understand what you are going through. So professionals, also community group, other women who are going through this or who understand this, have been there, is so important.
Yep. Fully agree. Raabsmiths is a great place to go. If you go into our featured section in the Facebook group, and I think it's called therapists and coaches, Raabsmiths is going to be linked under there. And so you can go there and you can look for some of the certified professionals. I'm not certified, but I'm trained. So that many, if not all of our coaches here in the group are also trained. I think most of them are trained in Raabsmiths. So, and some are certified. So highly recommend that. Finding someone to walk with you. People kind of think like it's one or the other, but I think that there's really special things you can get from therapy and then special things you can get from coaching. And one from coaching is really having that person that's walking with you. And most, not all, but many have gone through what you've been through. And so you've got somebody on your side who's already read all the books and and then they can walk with you through it, and they've been through it. So there's not going to be that fear of judgment or you should have this or things like that.
100%.
But thank you so much, Raabsmiths, for coming on here today and chatting with us. We're just so grateful for you. And thank you all of those that are listening today. If you have any extra questions, again, be sure to let us know. Thanks, everybody. See ya.